I suspected my wife was planning a divorce, so I moved my assets. 2 weeks later, she filed and claimed it was all a joke when her plan backfired. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction lately, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world, and we're so grateful for each of you. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey folks, I've been scrolling through posts here for a while, always thinking I'd never have my own story to share. But life has a way of surprising you, and I've been carrying this around for months. I need to let it out. Let me just say up front, I've never been the type to jump to conclusions or assume the worst. My wife, let's just call her M, and I've been together for 6 years, married for 3. Things were solid, or so I thought. We had the usual ups and downs, sure, but nothing that made me think, oh, there's trouble here. In fact, for most of our relationship, we were that couple. Teammates through and through. We laughed at dumb inside jokes, debated over which movie to watch for hours, and had this rhythm that just worked. She'd plan elaborate date nights, and I'd surprise her with her favourite takeout after a long day. It felt effortless, like we'd figured out this whole love thing. That's why what happened next hit me like a ton of bricks. About 6 months ago, things started to shift. At first, it was little things, stuff you'd probably miss if you weren't paying attention. She started taking her phone everywhere, even if she was just going to the kitchen or folding laundry. Before this, her phone would sit on the coffee table for hours, and she didn't care who picked it up. I made a joke one day saying, "What, are you running some secret spy ring now?" She laughed it off and said, "No, work's been emailing me a lot." Okay, fine. But then, a couple of days later, she set up a password. That one caught me off guard because she'd never used one before. I casually asked her why, and she said something vague about security and hackers. I didn't push it because I didn't want to sound paranoid, but something about it just felt off. It didn't stop there. She started stepping out of the room to take calls, something she never used to do. It wasn't subtle either. Her phone would ring and she'd be like, "Oh, let me just grab this real quick," and disappear into the bedroom or out onto the porch. If I asked who it was, she'd just say, "Just a friend from work." Then there was this new habit of hers, keeping her phone face down on the table. I didn't even realise it was a thing until one day I reached over to hand her something, and she quickly moved her phone out of the way. It was one of those blink and you'll miss it moments, but it stuck with me. It wasn't just the phone stuff though. She started feeling distant. Conversations that used to flow naturally now felt like I was pulling teeth. If I brought up future plans like, "Where should we go for our anniversary?" Or, "Do you think we should start saving for a new car?" she'd just nod and say, "Yeah, we'll see," before changing the subject. The day it all really clicked for me was this random Wednesday. She told me she was meeting a friend for coffee after work. It didn't sound weird. She does that sometimes. I happened to be running errands in the same area, and I thought, hey, why not surprise her? It'll be cute. When I got there, though, she wasn't with her friend. She was outside the cafe, pacing back and forth with her phone pressed to her ear. I stayed in my car because something about the way she was talking felt serious. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I caught snippets like, "It's almost ready," and "starting fresh soon." My stomach dropped. I couldn't figure out what she meant, but it didn't sound like work stuff or friend drama. It sounded bigger than that, like something she'd been planning. When she got home later, I casually asked how her coffee date went, trying to keep my tone neutral. She launched into a whole story about her friend venting about her boyfriend's latest screw-up. She seemed genuinely concerned, saying how she was offering advice and being a good listener. I nodded along, pretending to buy the story, but inside I was questioning everything. Was I overthinking it? Or was there something more going on that she wasn't telling me? The days went by, and I found myself paying even more attention to her behaviour. Not because I was trying to catch her in something, but because I needed answers. She wasn't doing anything overtly suspicious, but it was the small things that started adding up. Then out of nowhere, during a quiet dinner one night, she casually brought up our finances. We were talking about random stuff, her work, a new show she was excited about, when she said, "You know, we should really get our financial stuff organised." Her innocent smile didn't match the weight of the comment. I just stared at her for a second. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She shrugged nonchalantly. "I just think we should have everything in one place. Like account info, passwords, documents, just in case of an emergency." I didn't know how to respond. This was out of nowhere, and we'd never discussed anything like this before. "What kind of emergencies?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She gave a small shrug, again, a bit too easily. "I don't know, just like, what if something happens to one of us? Or what if we need to make a quick decision?" Her explanation seemed reasonable at first glance, but there was something off about the way she said it. Too rehearsed, like she had been waiting for the perfect moment to bring it up. Alarm bells went off in my head, but I just nodded and muttered, "Yeah, I guess that makes sense." Though, inside, I was already wondering, why now? That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Was this just normal adulting? Or was it a sign of something deeper? The more I thought about it, the more it started to click with everything else. The phone calls, the strange conversation at the cafe, her increasing distance. It didn't add up, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. Then, a few days later, she brought it up again. We were in the kitchen, I was making a sandwich, and she was scrolling on her phone when she casually said, "So have you thought more about organising the bank stuff? Like, do you know where all the account details are?" I stopped what I was doing and turned to face her. "Okay, what's going on?" I asked, keeping my tone calm but firm. "You've been bringing up finances a lot lately. Is there something I should know?" She looked up from her phone, caught off guard. "No, nothing's wrong," she said quickly, letting out a nervous laugh. "I just think it's important, that's all. For emergencies." "Emergencies like what?" I pressed, not buying it. She shrugged again, her face unreadable. "I don't know, just life stuff. It's not a big deal. I just think it's something we should stay on top of." Her answer felt vague. Too vague. I nodded, but inside my suspicion only grew. It didn't feel like a casual suggestion anymore. It felt like she was hiding something, and I had no idea what, everything we'd shared. But the more I looked at those transfers, the more I realised that if I didn't do something, I'd regret it. That evening while she was out, I sat down at my desk. My hands were shaking as I pulled up all the documents on my laptop. Bank accounts, investments, even the house deed. Each file felt like a betrayal, but the voice in my head told me this was about survival, not sabotage. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I just had to cover my back. I made a list of everything I could transfer and how to do it without raising suspicion. As I typed, the weight of what I was doing hit me like a ton of bricks. I was playing defense against the person I thought would always have my back. It felt like I was betraying her, but the reality was sinking in. I needed to act before I lost everything. I called my mum afterward. I didn't give her all the details, just enough to explain why I needed her help. "I need you to hold on to some things for me for a while. It's nothing bad, just something I need to do to protect myself. Just in case." There was a pause on the other end. She was probably trying to figure out what I wasn't saying. "Are you okay?" Her voice was full of concern. "Yeah," I lied. "It's just a precaution. Nothing to worry about," I said, though I could hear the hesitation in her voice when she replied, "Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you need." Hanging up the phone, I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. I hated dragging my mum into this mess, but knowing she was on my side gave me a small sense of stability in a situation that felt like quicksand. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep this up, but for now it was the only move I had. By the time Em came home, I had already started the process. I transferred most of our assets, our savings, my investments, even the house, into my mum's name. I left enough in the joint account to keep up appearances, but the rest was locked down tight. She didn't notice a thing. She came in, kissed me on the cheek, and asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I acted normal, but inside my mind was racing. Part of me felt guilty, like I was betraying her trust. But another part of me felt relieved, like I was finally taking control of a situation that had been spiralling out of my hands for months. Over the next few days, I kept everything as normal as possible. I didn't want to raise any red flags. Em seemed content, even unusually cheerful at times, which only made me more suspicious. If she was planning something, she was doing an expert job of hiding it. What stood out, though, was that she didn't bring up the finances again, not once. After I confronted her about it, it was like the subject had vanished from her mind completely. At first, I thought maybe I was overreacting, that she just dropped it because it wasn't that big of a deal. But the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like she was avoiding it. Like she was dreading the idea of me pressing her again. I started catching her glancing at me occasionally, quick, subtle looks, as if she was weighing whether to say something. But as soon as I caught her eye, she'd turn her attention back to whatever she was doing, her phone, the TV, a book. It was small, but it felt deliberate. Almost like she was waiting for me to bring it up, but didn't want to risk pushing it too far. The silence was deafening, and it made me even more uneasy. This wasn't like her. She'd always been upfront about anything important in the past. The fact that she was avoiding this now, it felt deliberate. She had to be testing the waters, and I wasn't about to give her the green light. Whatever her next move was, I needed to stay one step ahead. That night I made sure everything was airtight. I went over all the paperwork again, double-checking every detail of the asset transfers to my mum. The house, the savings, the investments, everything was legally in her name now and locked in a trust that couldn't be contested. I even called my mum just to confirm she had all the documentation on her end. 2 weeks went by and everything seemed normal. Too normal. She was being more affectionate, initiating conversations about random things like work, what we should eat for dinner, even planning weekend trips. It threw me off. For months she'd been distant, avoiding any conversation deeper than surface-level talk. The sudden shift in behaviour made me second-guess everything. Maybe I'd been overreacting. Maybe the weird behaviour had just been stress, or something I couldn't quite understand. But then on a random Friday night, she sat me down on the couch, turned off the TV and said, "We need to talk." My stomach immediately dropped. I knew what was coming before she even said it. "I think we should get a divorce," she said, her tone so calm it felt rehearsed. It wasn't angry and it wasn't emotional. It was just cold, like she was telling me we'd run out of the milk. I stared at her, unsure how to respond, as she launched into her reasoning. She talked about needing space, wanting to figure herself out, feeling like she'd lost her identity in the marriage. Standard breakup lines that didn't actually explain anything. But then she said something that hit differently. "You know, I've made a lot of sacrifices for you over the years, and I don't think you really appreciate them. I deserve more." That last part stung. It wasn't just about her wanting out. It was about her framing this like I owed her something. That all of this was my fault, and she was just claiming what was rightfully hers. I sat there trying to process what she was saying, but a new question kept bubbling to the surface. "Why now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Then she dropped a line that made everything start to click. "A friend of mine has been helping me see things more clearly," she said, not meeting my eyes. A friend? The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Who was this friend? Why were they involved in my marriage? The way she said it wasn't casual. It sounded like someone had been hyping her up, convincing her that leaving me wasn't just an option. It was a strategy, something she needed to execute. As she continued to talk about how she deserved more because of her sacrifices, the more I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sacrifices? What sacrifices? She'd been happy with me, or at least that's what she always said. I'd worked hard to give her the life she wanted. I wasn't just talking about money either. When she wanted to move closer to her job, I agreed, even though it meant a longer commute for me. When she wanted to take that expensive yoga retreat last year, I made sure we budgeted for it, even skipping a vacation I'd been looking forward to, just so she could go. I supported her when she switched careers twice, telling her it was okay to take the leap because I wanted her to be happy. I thought being a good husband meant putting her first whenever I could. And it wasn't like I was some inattentive, distant partner. I showed up. I remembered anniversaries, those little details about her favourite snacks, and things she liked doing on weekends. I planned date nights when she said she was feeling stuck in a rut. I listened to her vent about work, her friends, her family. I didn't always get it right, but I always tried. That's what made her "I deserve more" line hit so hard. I didn't buy it, not for a second. She wasn't unhappy because of anything I did or didn't do. She was unhappy because something had changed in her. Maybe it was this mysterious friend she kept bringing up. Maybe it was something else. But the woman sitting in front of me now wasn't the person I married, and I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story of our marriage to fit her new narrative. I didn't press her in the moment. Instead, I nodded and said something neutral like, "If that's how you feel, I guess we should figure out the next steps." She looked surprised that I wasn't arguing or begging her to stay. But I didn't care. My focus had already shifted. I needed to know who or what was behind this sudden, calculated shift in her behaviour. This wasn't just her waking up one day and deciding she wanted out. This was something bigger, and I wasn't going to let it blindside me any more than it already had. After that conversation, she moved into her own apartment. By Monday, I got the divorce papers. And let me tell you that they weren't just about ending the relationship. They were about taking everything. Half the house, my savings, my investments, the car. She wanted it all, plus some vague clauses about spousal support that made no sense given her solid income. It was like she was swinging for the fences, expecting me to roll over and hand her everything I'd worked for. At first I thought it was just her being vindictive, but the way she'd framed her demands, so detailed and aggressive, made me more and more certain that there was someone coaching her through this, someone with an agenda. So I started digging. It wasn't like I could just ask her who she'd been talking to, so I had to get creative. I started with her social media. She hadn't blocked me, and while she didn't post much, I knew the game. You can learn a lot from what people don't post. I scrolled through her tagged photos, checking the comments, searching for anything that stood out. That's when I noticed a pattern. Someone named Jake kept liking and commenting on her posts. Nothing overly flirtatious, just enough to make me pause. I clicked his profile, public. A guy in his 30s who worked in marketing, according to his bio. At first glance, he didn't seem like much, just an average guy with a normal job. But the more I scrolled, the more I noticed. A photo posted from the same cafe I'd seen her at weeks ago, the same day I overheard her talking about wanting to start fresh. My stomach churned as I kept scrolling. There were more hints, comments like, "You've got this," and a selfie he posted from what looked like her new apartment. None of it was concrete proof, but it was enough to plant a seed of suspicion. What was he doing in her apartment? Why did he seem to be so involved? And why had she never mentioned him? I wasn't sure what to do with this information yet, but I knew I couldn't just sit back and wait for answers to fall into my lap. Her mention of a friend helping her through all this had stuck with me. I needed to know who it was. So I decided to call one of our mutual friends, Lisa. She and my wife had been close for years, so if anyone knew what was going on, it would be her. I kept the conversation casual, just asking if she'd talked to my wife recently, or if anything seemed off. Lisa responded quickly, saying she hadn't heard anything about a friend or any advice. I asked a few more questions, trying to probe gently, but she shut down the conversation defensively. "I really can't help you," she said. "I don't know anything." It felt rushed, like she was trying to avoid getting involved. And that made me suspicious. Not ready to give up, I called another friend, Emily. I went through the same routine, explaining that I was just trying to make sense of everything. At first she seemed hesitant, dodging my questions with vague answers. When I pressed a little harder, she abruptly ended the call, leaving me feeling more uncertain than ever. But then, to my surprise, Emily called me back. She said she needed to make sure whatever she said wouldn't get back to Em. I promised it wouldn't, and after a long pause she finally told me what she knew. Apparently my wife had been spending a lot of time with someone named Jake, a guy she'd met through work. Emily didn't know much more, but she did say this. From what she'd heard, Jake was deeply involved in the advice my wife was getting about the divorce. Hearing that name felt like a piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Now it was clear. This wasn't just about her needing space or finding herself. Someone else was in the picture, coaching her through every step, and I was determined to figure out why. I knew I had to confront it, but in my own way. I couldn't just walk up to her and ask about Jake. It wouldn't make sense. Instead, that weekend, I drove to her apartment building and parked a block away, trying to keep my distance and get some clarity. I waited, sitting in the car, my heart beating in my chest. A couple of hours later, she walked out of the building with him, Jake. They didn't hold hands, but the way they walked together, close, leaning in to talk, told me everything I needed to know. They got into his car and drove off, leaving me behind staring at the empty space where they'd been. I didn't follow them. I didn't need to. At that moment, it was clear. She hadn't just fallen out of love with me. She'd been planning her exit with someone else. And now it all made sense. The sudden distance, the weird financial questions, the aggressive demands, the divorce papers. She wasn't just leaving me, she was leaving me with nothing. And she had someone backing her every step of the way. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and messages. After the mediation session, it was like a switch had flipped. She went into full meltdown mode, and the chaos that followed was almost surreal. It started with the calls, endless calls, some of them sounding like she was trying to reason with me, others like she was pleading for a second chance. At first, she sounded calm, even apologetic, leaving voicemails that started with, "I think we just need to talk," or "I know this got messy, but we can fix it." I didn't respond. When I didn't pick up, the tone started to shift. By the second day, her messages were bouncing between sobbing and screaming. One voicemail would be her crying, saying she made a mistake and didn't want to lose everything we'd built together. The next would be an angry tirade, accusing me of being selfish, stingy, and vindictive, blaming me for everything going wrong in her life. It was exhausting, but I stayed strong. I ignored it all. My lawyer had advised me not to engage, and honestly, I didn't want to. I was done playing her games. But as the days went on, I started to realise just how far she was willing to go. One evening I came home to find a letter slid under my door. It wasn't from her lawyer, but it was from her. The handwriting was familiar, but the words felt foreign. She'd written me a long, emotional letter about all the things she'd regretted, about how we'd lost our way, and about how much she missed me. I almost laughed when I read it. It was like she had no idea who I'd become in this mess. She wrote as if none of it had ever happened. No betrayal, no months of silence, no sudden calculated divorce demands. Just a woman pleading for another chance, like she was expecting me to welcome her back with open arms. That night I crumpled up the letter and threw it in the trash. The thing was, part of me still wished it had worked out differently. Part of me still wished I could be the guy who forgave everything, who wiped the slate clean and moved forward. But I wasn't that person anymore. She'd taken that from me. I wasn't going to fall for the act again. The days turned into weeks, and each day I felt more at peace with the decision I'd made. The weight that had been crushing me for months started to lift. Sure, the financial mess was still a burden, but now it felt like a calculated move I'd had no choice but to make. I wasn't the villain in this story, she was, and yet the hardest part was the emotional toll. Even as I was winning, even as the legal battles seemed to be falling in my favour, the emotional devastation lingered. The life I thought I had, the love I thought was solid, all of it had been a lie, or at least part of it had. One afternoon my lawyer called with an update. They had filed a motion to dismiss her spousal support demands, and the judge had ruled in my favour. It felt like a small victory, but it was also hollow. In the grand scheme of things, what did winning the battle really mean? I was still left with the emotional wreckage of a relationship that had been shattered from the inside out. The divorce wasn't finalised yet, but I knew it was coming. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel joy. I felt numb. Still, as the weeks passed, I started seeing signs of a future beyond this mess. I started looking forward to getting my life back, living without the constant anxiety, without the manipulation, without the games. Maybe I'd even find someone who wouldn't twist my love into a weapon. Someone who saw me for who I was, not for what they could get. But I wasn't in a rush. First, I had to get through this, and that meant staying firm. No more second chances. No more false hopes. I had made my choice and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into changing my mind. I sat there, the phone in my hand, the weight of the text sinking in like lead. My thoughts spun wildly, but they had all kept coming back to the same cold truth. This wasn't just a messy divorce. It was a deliberate attempt to ruin me, to break me down, all under the guise of a broken marriage. Jake hadn't just been some guy she was confiding in. He was a puppet master, pulling strings, coaching her every move, and manipulating her into believing she could get everything she wanted by crushing me in the process. I couldn't stop staring at the words on the screen, the way she talked about securing her future, how she was playing me like a pawn in a game she had no intention of losing. "Make him feel guilty if you have to. He owes you," Jake had said. Owes her? For what? What had I ever done but support her, love her, and give her everything I had? That was the part that hurt the most. The coldness, the utter lack of empathy. She wasn't just hurting me, she was doing it deliberately, with a clear end goal in mind. And Jake was egging her on every step of the way. I had been underestimating the depth of her betrayal. I thought I had it figured out, that her distancing herself was the key to understanding what was happening, but I never imagined she'd already lined up her exit strategy with someone else. This was no longer about love or a broken marriage. It was about greed, manipulation, and a calculated plan to take everything I had worked for. I paced around my apartment, the air feeling heavy, suffocating. Part of me wanted to confront her, to throw this all in her face and demand she explain herself. But I knew that would only give her the reaction she was hoping for. Drama, emotion, and probably another round of blaming me for everything. I couldn't give her that satisfaction. The texts spread like wildfire among our mutual friends. Matt shared them with a few people, and from there they made their rounds. It didn't take long for her carefully constructed narrative to fall apart. Those who had been neutral, or even supportive of her, began pulling away, and the shift was almost instantaneous. The ones who had been defending her, or sitting on the fence, now saw her for what she really was. Even her closest allies started distancing themselves. By the time the divorce was finalised, she had nothing but her personal belongings. Her lawyer, seeing the writing on the wall, quietly dropped her case. All those bold demands she had made, half the house, my savings, the car, crumbled under the weight of the paperwork I had meticulously prepared. And the trust I'd set up with my mum was untouchable. She had no leg to stand on. Jake, he disappeared the second things started to unravel. I wouldn't be surprised if he'd been using her just as much as she'd been using me. From what I could piece together, he'd been feeding her delusions of independence, a fresh start, a new life with him, free from the shackles of the past. But the second it became clear she wouldn't be walking away with anything, he was gone. Without Jake in her corner, her confidence took a nosedive. The calls and texts didn't stop, but now they were more desperate. "Can we just talk, please? I'll do anything to fix this," one voicemail said. Another, "You don't have to forgive me, but can't we just settle this and move on? I'll drop everything if you just talk to me." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. Even her family started pulling away. Her brother reached out to me at one point, apologising for some of the things he'd said earlier when he believed her side of the story. "I didn't know what she was doing to you," he admitted. "I'm sorry I ever took her word for it. As for me, I got the house, my savings, and something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace of mind. My mum, as always, was my rock. She came over one weekend with buckets of paint and a list of ideas to help me reclaim the space as my own. It wasn't just about changing the walls, it was about reclaiming my life. Now life feels like it's finally mine again. No more second guessing, every little interaction, no more wondering what I missed. Just peace. She's a chapter in my past, one I don't reread anymore. And as far as I'm concerned, the rest of the story is entirely mine to write. Thanks for watching. If you've been through something similar or learned something from this, drop a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Remember, you're in control of your own story.